You want to know what happens when a trust fund kid with a computer science degree from daddy's donations thinks he can fire the guy holding all the keys to the kingdom. Dylan Mercer stood at the head of the glass conference room, projecting his PowerPoint like it was divine scripture handed down from Mount Venture Capital. His Patagonia vest probably cost more than my first 3 months of rent combined. His teeth were unnaturally white, the kind of white that only comes from professional bleaching and a complete absence of coffee addiction. His haircut was $60 too expensive, deliberately messy in that way that takes an hour to achieve. And his watch, one of those oversized titanium things that screamed money in a way that made everyone in the room simultaneously envious and uncomfortable. He clicked to a slide titled Legacy Infrastructure Sunset and pointed directly at me. The laser pointer made a small red dot on my chest like a sniper's warning. Your systems are obsolete. Marcus. He said it with the casual cruelty of someone who has never had to rebuild a production server at 3 a.m. while a client screams in your ear about downtime costs. He said it the way you might comment on the weather or mention that your coffee had gone cold. We're moving to a cloud-native future. And frankly, your approach doesn't fit the vision. This company needs to evolve. And sometimes, evolution means leaving the dinosaurs behind. Scattered laughter from the middle managers who had learned that laughing at Dylan's jokes was cheaper than disagreeing with them. I sat there in my worn gray hoodie, the one with the coffee stain on the sleeve that I'd stopped trying to remove 3 years ago. My coffee had gone cold 20 minutes into his presentation. I just looked at him, this kid who probably couldn't tell the difference between a firewall and a Firefox browser. And I didn't say a word. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I didn't point out that every single piece of infrastructure he was calling obsolete had been designed specifically to meet federal compliance requirements that his shiny, new, cloud-native solutions couldn't touch. After 8 years building the security architecture that kept this company from becoming the next headline breach, you learn that silence is just another form of strategy. You learn that the loudest person in the room is usually the one who understands the least. You learn to wait. What Dylan didn't know, what nobody in that fluorescent-lit conference room knew, was that every single authentication key, every encryption certificate, every access credential to our $18 million federal contract ran through systems that only existed because I built them with my own hands over countless sleepless nights. Systems that weren't documented anywhere except in my head. Systems that would brick themselves permanently if someone tried to access them without knowing the exact sequence of recovery codes that changed every quarter. Systems that I, and only I, knew how to operate. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where this really started. I'm Marcus Chen. My official title is Principal Security Architect, which sounds impressive at cocktail parties until you realize it's corporate speak for the guy who gets blamed when things break and completely ignored when they don't. My actual job is keeping hackers, nation-states, bored teenagers in Eastern Europe, and occasionally our own engineers from burning down the digital infrastructure that makes this company function. I'm the human firewall, the last line of defense, the guy whose phone rings at 2 a.m. when something explodes and everyone else is sleeping peacefully. For 8 years, I've been the ghost in the machine at Meridian Technologies. Started when we were 47 people crammed into a converted warehouse, back when the CEO still knew everyone's name, and the biggest decision of the week was what to order for Friday lunch. I was employee number 23, hired to set up a basic security system for a startup that had somehow landed a small government subcontract and suddenly needed to care about things like compliance and encryption standards. That small contract grew. Then it grew again. Then it became the $18 million centerpiece of our federal division, the crown jewel that funded 70% of our operations, and every single piece of security infrastructure that protected that contract, from the authentication servers to the encryption protocols to the key management systems that passed every federal audit with flying colors. I built it, line by line, night by night, alone. The server room sits 3 floors below street level in a part of the building most employees don't even know exists. It smells like recycled air, industrial carpet, and the particular ozone scent of machines running hot around the clock. The fluorescent lights never turn off. The temperature stays at exactly 67 degrees year-round, cool enough to keep the servers happy, cold enough to require a jacket if you're going to be there for more than an hour. I'm there for more than an hour almost every day. The room hums with that particular frequency of 100 machines running at full capacity, the kind of white noise that becomes a heartbeat after enough years. 47 rack servers arranged in neat rows, 300 terabytes of encrypted data, enough processing power to handle every government request, every security scan, every authentication query that flows through our systems. I've spent more nights in this room than in my own apartment. The cleaning crew knows to leave me a fresh pot of coffee by 10 p.m. Marco, the night security guard, learned to stop asking if I needed anything around year 3. The janitors have stopped being surprised to find me asleep on the floor next to a rack at 6 in the morning, while the rest of the company chases the latest framework or argues about whether we should be using Kubernetes or Docker Swarm, or whatever buzzword landed in TechCrunch that morning. I'm down here making sure the actual infrastructure doesn't collapse under the weight of their experiments. I'm the reason we've never had a major breach in 8 years. Not a small breach, not a minor incident, nothing. 0 unauthorized access to federal systems, 0 data exfiltration events, 0 compliance failures. I'm the reason our SOC 2 audits are so boring that the auditors actually complained once about having nothing interesting to report. I'm the reason that $18 million federal contract keeps renewing every year without a single security incident flagged on the government side. Here's the thing about security architecture that people like Dylan Mercer will never understand. The better you do your job, the more invisible you become. Nobody thanks the lock on their door until someone tries to break in. Nobody appreciates the immune system until they get sick. Nobody thinks about the guy maintaining the infrastructure until the infrastructure fails. And our infrastructure had never failed. Not once in 8 years. Because I knew where every vulnerability lived. I knew which patches were cosmetic and which ones actually mattered. I knew exactly how our authentication systems talked to each other in ways that weren't documented anywhere except inside my head. The key management system is the crown jewel of our security infrastructure. I designed it myself during a 72-hour marathon session when our original vendor went bankrupt and left us with 90 days to migrate or lose our federal certification. The official documentation exists, technically, 347 pages of technical specifications stored on a SharePoint drive that maybe 4 people in the company have ever accessed. But that documentation is written in my particular brand of technical shorthand. It references systems by nicknames only I use. Delta 7 for the primary authentication cluster, Backbone for the encrypted traffic routing, the Vault for the master key storage. It assumes a level of institutional knowledge that walked out the door 3 years ago when the last 2 engineers who understood any of it got poached by Amazon and Google respectively. They took 6-figure signing bonuses and left me holding the entire security architecture like a single point of failure with a pulse and a caffeine addiction. I complained about it once, told the CTO we needed to hire redundancy, train backups, document everything in plain English instead of Marcus Easy. He nodded sympathetically and said we'd address it in next year's budget. That was 4 years ago. The budget never came, the documentation never happened, and the knowledge stayed exactly where it had always been. In my head, only my head, no backup, no redundancy, just me. The quarterly key rotation system I built requires physical presence in the server room, plus knowledge of a recovery phrase that changes every 90 days. The phrase is generated by an algorithm I wrote specifically to be impossible to reverse engineer. It's not elegant, it's not modern, it's not cloud native, but it's airtight. No single point of failure, except me. And Dylan Mercer had just decided I was obsolete. If you're following along, and this sounds like the opening act of a corporate catastrophe, you're absolutely right. Before I tell you how this particular train wreck unfolds in spectacular detail, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Maybe drop a like while you're at it. I'm about to describe the systematic dismantling of a man's entire career. And honestly, I could use some witnesses. About 95% of you are ghost listening anyway. You're enjoying the carnage without leaving a trace. Come on now, be better than that. The crash is coming, and you're going to want to be on record as having seen it. Now, back to Dylan and his cloud-native delusions. Dylan Mercer wasn't hired. He was installed. Like malware on a corporate network that the IT department is too afraid to remove because it came from the CEO's email. His uncle, our CTO, Richard Mercer, had been looking for a way to get his nephew a real job after his blockchain startup imploded in spectacular public fashion. Something about an NFT marketplace for digital real estate that turned out to be mostly bots, trading with other bots, pumping artificial volume to attract investors who never got their money back. The SEC investigation was still technically ongoing when Dylan arrived at Meridian Technologies. His LinkedIn had been scrubbed clean of any reference to Mercer Block Ventures. His title was Director of Technology Transformation, which, as far as I could tell, meant he got to attend meetings I wasn't invited to and make decisions about systems he'd never touched. He showed up on a Thursday in September, 3 days after Labor Day, with a messenger bag full of moleskin notebooks and opinions about microservices architecture. His first day outfit was carefully calculated Silicon Valley casual. Designer jeans that probably cost $400, a slim fit button-down with the sleeves rolled to exactly the midpoint of his forearms, sneakers that cost more than my car payment. I met him in the break room, his second week. He was trying to connect to the guest Wi-Fi on his new MacBook Pro, the one with the company card sticker still visible on the corner like a badge of executive privilege. The machine was top of the line, probably $4,000 worth of computing power that he was using primarily to check email and build PowerPoint presentations about synergy. "Hey, you're Marcus, right?" He smiled too wide, the kind of smile that's practiced in bathroom mirrors and perfected at networking events. Too many teeth showing, eyes that didn't quite match the expression. "My uncle says you're basically the whole security team wrapped into one person, the institutional knowledge guy." I told him that was generous. He laughed like I'd said something clever, throwing his head back slightly in that performative way people do when they want you to think they find you charming. We both knew it wasn't a compliment. Institutional knowledge is corporate speak, for hasn't been replaced yet. The first month was all charm offensive. Dylan made a point of stopping by my desk at least twice a week to ask questions about the architecture. "How does the authentication layer talk to the encryption module? Marcus, what's the latency on the key rotation system? Walk me through the federal compliance requirements again." He'd nod along like he understood the answers, occasionally jotting something in his moleskin notebook with a mechanical pencil that probably cost more than my keyboard. He'd CC me on emails about modernization initiatives with subject lines full of buzzwords: digital transformation, roadmap, Q4, cloud migration strategy, kickoff, legacy system, sunset planning. I knew what he was doing. I've been in this industry long enough to recognize when someone is building a paper trail. He was documenting every conversation, creating a record that showed he'd consulted the old guard before making his changes. It's the corporate equivalent of taking a photo with someone before you stab them in the back. Plausible deniability wrapped in a smile. By month 2, the mask started slipping. I found out about the new authentication vendor through a company-wide Slack announcement 3 days after the contract was signed. No consultation, no security review, no discussion of how their system would integrate with our federal compliance requirements. Just a cheerful message from Dylan about exciting partnerships and modern solutions. I pulled him aside after the announcement, caught him in the hallway outside the executive conference room. "That vendor doesn't meet FedRAMP requirements." I kept my voice level, calm. "Our federal contract specifies certification standards they can't provide. We'll lose compliance within 6 months." Dylan tilted his head like I'd said something amusing, that condescending half smile that people with power use when they want you to feel small. "Marcus, I appreciate the institutional knowledge. I really do." He emphasized, really like he was explaining something to a child. "But we've done the due diligence on our end. The new system is more agile, more scalable. Your concerns are noted, but we need to move forward. The industry is evolving. We have to evolve with it." My concerns were noted. The phrase tasted like cold coffee and stale donuts. Corporate speak for your opinion has been acknowledged and will be thoroughly ignored. The following weeks brought more of the same. Meetings about the federal contract started happening without me. I'd see calendar invites pop up on other people's screens. Dylan's name at the top, discussing systems I had built and maintained for 8 years. Architecture decisions appeared in Confluence, pages I hadn't been consulted on. Diagrams that got the data flow wrong. Integration plans that would have broken our encryption protocols. Migration timelines that assumed we could move petabytes of classified data over a single weekend without any of the government liaisons noticing. Process changes rolled out that ignored the contractual realities of our federal clients. Dylan wanted weekly deploys to production. The federal contract specified quarterly deployments with 6 weeks of mandatory testing. He wanted to move to open-source encryption libraries. Our certification required specific proprietary implementations that had been audited by federal security teams. I documented everything, every decision made without security review, every compliance requirement ignored, every email where I flagged risks and received responses about innovation velocity and organizational agility. I saved them to a folder on my personal drive, encrypted with a key that only I knew, and watched the company slowly wire itself for disaster. At one point, Dylan called my security protocols legacy ops clutter in a company-wide Slack channel, tagged the engineering team, the product team, half the executives. Marcus's approach served us well in the past, but we're building the infrastructure of the future now. Sometimes that means letting go of outdated thinking. I wasn't tagged on the message. I found out because Kevin from the infrastructure team sent me a screenshot. I was the punchline. The worst part was watching people start to believe him. Dylan had a title. He had the CTO's ear. He had slide decks full of impressive graphics and ROI projections that looked great if you didn't understand what any of the numbers actually meant. He wore confidence like expensive cologne, and most of the executives, too tired or too distracted to question anything that came with that particular scent, let him spray it everywhere. I didn't fight it, not openly, not yet. I watched, I documented, and when he called my workflow bloated in a leadership meeting, I smiled and nodded. Let the boy hang himself with his own rope. I had 8 years of institutional knowledge. He had 6 months of overconfidence. Eventually, those two things would collide. The federal contract had a clause, Section 7.2, buried on page 47 of a 112-page document that almost nobody had actually read. I'd helped write it myself during the original contract negotiation, back when our legal team still included someone who understood technology well enough to know what needed protecting. The clause specified that any material change to the security infrastructure required written approval from the government's technical liaison. Any material change, not optional, not suggested, required, no approval, no change. Violations triggered automatic review and potential contract termination. Termination with a 12-month penalty clause that came out to approximately $3.4 million in immediate financial liability, plus the loss of the $18 million annual contract itself. Dylan's cloud migration initiative, the new authentication vendor, the architecture changes happening without security review, every single one of them qualified as a material change. And nobody had asked the government for permission, because nobody except me knew that clause existed. And I had stopped reminding people about it right around the time Dylan called my work legacy ops clutter. Sometimes, silence is the most devastating weapon you have. The axe fell on a Wednesday in March. Middle of the week, middle of nowhere. The kind of day that shouldn't matter, but suddenly does. I got a calendar invite at 8:47 a.m. No subject line, no agenda attached. Just a 30-minute meeting in Conference Room C with Dylan, the HR director, and someone from legal I'd never seen before. I knew what it was immediately. You don't work in corporate America for nearly 2 decades without recognizing the shape of your own termination. Conference Room C sits on the 4th floor, the executive level, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the parking lot. It has that particular corporate smell of new carpet, stale ambition, and whatever artificial air freshener the cleaning crew uses to mask the desperation. Dylan was already seated when I walked in at 9 a.m. sharp. His laptop open, but screen angled away from my line of sight. His moleskin notebook closed on the table in front of him. Mechanical pencil laid precisely parallel to the spine. The HR director, a woman named Karen Holloway, sat to his left with a manila folder thick enough to suggest they'd been preparing for this moment for a while. Her expression was professionally neutral, the kind of face you learn to make when your job is telling people their job no longer exists. The legal guy, mid-50s with a gray suit and the tired eyes of someone who'd done this too many times, had a legal pad with nothing written on it yet. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't need to. Marcus, thanks for joining us. Dylan gestured to the empty chair across from him like he owned the room, which, in that moment, I suppose he did. We need to discuss your role going forward. He didn't use the word termination. That would be too direct, too honest for someone like Dylan. Instead, he talked about organizational restructuring and elimination of redundancy and realignment with modern infrastructure needs. He talked about the evolution of the security function and how my position had become a bottleneck to innovation. He actually used the phrase bottleneck to innovation twice, like he was reading from a script someone else had written for him, which, knowing Dylan, he probably was. The meeting lasted 14 minutes. I know, because I watched the clock on the wall behind Karen's head the entire time, counting seconds, counting the ceiling tiles. There were 47 tiles. I counted them 3 times to be sure. When he finished his prepared speech, Karen slid a document across the glass table. Standard termination package, 2-week severance, which was generous for someone being let go for performance reasons. Except I wasn't being let go for performance. I was being let go because I was an obstacle to Dylan's vision. Cobra information, a confidentiality agreement that ran 11 pages and basically said I couldn't talk about anything I'd done for the company for the rest of my natural life. Your access will be terminated at end of business today. Karen's voice was professionally sympathetic in that HR way that sounds warm but costs nothing. We'll need your badge and laptop before you leave the building. A member of our IT team will escort you to collect your personal belongings. Dylan leaned forward with that practiced smile, the one that showed too many teeth. I want you to know this isn't personal. Marcus, he actually put his hand on his chest like he was making a pledge. You built great systems for where we were. We just need something different for where we're going. I looked at him for a long moment. The room was silent, except for the soft whisper of the air conditioning and the distant hum of the building's HVAC system. There's a Zoom call scheduled for Friday with the federal contract team. My voice was level. No anger, no desperation, just stating facts. Quarterly security review. Patricia Chen from the GSA will be leading it. Who's handling that now? Dylan's smile didn't waver. I'll be managing all government relations personally going forward. His voice oozed confidence. Don't worry about transition details. We've got everything covered. I nodded slowly. Then I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small USB drive. Black plastic. 16 gigabytes. Completely unremarkable. I set it on the table between us, exactly in the center. This contains the documentation for the key management system. I kept my voice completely flat. No emotion, no warning. The recovery phrases, the rotation schedule, The emergency protocols. You'll need it when the system cycles at the end of this month. Dylan glanced at the drive, like it might bite him. His smile flickered for just a moment. Then he reached out and took it, slipping it into his laptop bag with the casual confidence of someone who had no idea what he was holding. "Thanks. That's very professional of you." He sounded almost surprised. "We appreciate you making this transition smooth." I stood up, handed my badge to Karen, and walked toward the door. My hand was on the frame when I stopped, turned back. One more thing. Dylan looked up, still smiling, still confident, still completely unaware. "When the government liaison asks about the infrastructure changes, tell them to check section 7.2. I held his gaze. "They'll know what it means." I didn't wait for his response. Didn't need to. The walk to my car took longer than usual. Past the security desk, where Marco wouldn't meet my eyes. Through the lobby, where the receptionist suddenly became very interested in her keyboard. Into the parking garage, where my 11-year-old Honda Civic sat, waiting like a faithful dog. 8 years, compressed into a cardboard box with a coffee mug, a dying desk plant, and a framed photo of my team from 3 years ago when we'd just passed our first federal audit without a single finding. What they didn't know, what Dylan definitely didn't know, was that the USB drive I left on that table was a decoy. I'd created it 6 months ago, right around the time Dylan started talking about sunsetting legacy infrastructure. The documentation on it was technically accurate. Every procedure, every protocol, every step-by-step instruction. But it was written for a version of the system that hadn't existed for 3 years, the current key management system, the one actually running our production infrastructure, protecting our federal contract, handling every authentication request for $18 million worth of government work, had been completely rebuilt during a quiet weekend when I discovered a critical vulnerability in the original architecture. I'd rewritten the entire thing from scratch, improved the encryption, added redundancy, changed the recovery phrase algorithm, migrated the master keys to new storage systems that weren't even mentioned in the original documentation. I never told anyone because there was never time for a formal change management process. There was always another crisis, another late-night emergency, another fire to put out, and now that knowledge existed in exactly one place, an encrypted file on a personal server that synced to my home computer every night, password protected, with a phrase I'd never written down anywhere. The only piece of institutional knowledge that actually mattered. Dylan thought he'd fired a dinosaur. What he'd actually done was pull the pin on a grenade and hand it back to himself. The Friday security review Zoom call started at 10 a.m. Pacific. I wasn't supposed to be watching. Officially, I was no longer an employee of Meridian Technologies. My access had been revoked. My accounts had been deleted. My name had already been removed from the company website's leadership page. But Kevin Chen, no relation, from the infrastructure team, had been with the company almost as long as I had. He knew what was coming, even if he couldn't say it out loud. He propped his phone against his monitor with the camera pointing at his laptop screen, muted his microphone, kept me on a parallel FaceTime call for the entire meeting. Corporate espionage. Technically, against policy. Absolutely necessary. Dylan appeared on the Zoom in a crisp, blue, button-down shirt. Company logo clearly visible on a standing banner behind him. His hair was freshly cut. His smile was freshly practiced. He'd rehearsed. You could tell by the way he kept glancing at notes just off camera. his eyes moving in that telltale reading pattern. The government liaison, Patricia Chen, had one of those faces that gave absolutely nothing away. 23 years in federal IT security had taught her exactly how much silence was worth in a negotiation. Her background was a plain gray wall. No decorations, no distractions, just her face, impassive as stone. "Good morning, Dylan." Her voice was flat, professional, completely devoid of warmth. "I understand there have been some changes to your security infrastructure since our last quarterly review." Dylan nodded enthusiastically, too enthusiastically, like a golden retriever who just learned a new trick. "Absolutely. Patricia, we've been modernizing our approach, moving toward a more agile, cloud-native architecture. Really exciting developments. I think you're going to be impressed with the direction we're taking." Patricia's expression didn't change. Not a flicker. "I see. And can you walk me through the current state of your key management system, the authentication protocols, how you're handling the quarterly rotation that was due?" She paused, checked something off-screen. 3 days ago. The silence that followed lasted 4 seconds. On a Zoom call, 4 seconds is an eternity. I watched Dylan's confidence fracture in real time through Kevin's phone camera. His eyes moved to something off-screen. Probably the USB documentation. The documentation for a system that no longer existed in that form. His lips moved slightly, like he was reading. Then he spoke. "Our key management system follows a centralized rotation protocol." His voice had lost some of its polish. "Master keys cycle on a 90-day schedule with recovery procedures documented in our security repository. The current recovery process is," he paused, consulted his notes again, "managed through our primary authentication cluster." Patricia nodded slowly. "And the current recovery phrase," Dylan's face went pale. Actually, visibly pale. The confidence drained out of him like water through a sieve. He said a phrase, the old phrase, the one from 3 years ago that would have worked perfectly fine if the system hadn't been completely rebuilt while he was busy making PowerPoints about digital transformation. Patricia's eyebrow lifted, just 0.5 centimeter, barely perceptible. "But I saw it, and I knew what it meant. That's not matching what my system shows." "Dylan," her voice was still flat, but there was something underneath it now, something sharp. "Can you verify through Kevin's camera?" I watched the exact moment Dylan realized he was standing on thin ice with the sun coming up. His eyes darted to the USB documentation, back to the camera, to someone off-screen, back to the camera. He started stammering about transition periods and documentation updates and bringing in additional technical resources for consultation. Patricia cut him off. "The original architect would be Marcus Chen." "Correct. The one your company terminated." She checked something off-screen again. 2 days ago, Dylan's mouth opened, closed, opened again. His video froze for a moment, a glitch that somehow made his panicked expression even more pronounced. When the feed stabilized, he was visibly sweating. I could see the shine on his forehead through Kevin's phone screen. "My technical liaison also informs me there have been undocumented changes to your authentication infrastructure." Patricia's voice was still calm, almost pleasant, the kind of pleasant that precedes a very unpleasant conversation. "Changes that weren't submitted for approval under Section 7.2 of our contract." "Can you clarify?" This time, the silence lasted 11 seconds. I counted. "Patricia, Dylan's voice had lost all its polish, all its rehearsed confidence. He sounded like a kid who'd been caught cheating on a test. I'm going to need to get back to you on the specifics. There may have been he swallowed, some communication gaps during our recent transition period. Patricia nodded slowly, that same stone-faced nod that gave nothing away. I'll give you until Monday. Full audit report of all infrastructure changes since January. Complete documentation of your current key management system. Current documentation. Dylan, not historical. And I'll need a meeting with whoever currently has administrative access to your core security architecture. She paused. Let that sink in. Given what you've shown me today, I'm also initiating a preliminary review under Section 7.2. My office will be in touch with your legal team by end of business today. The call ended with Dylan's face frozen in an expression somewhere between panic and nausea. Kevin sent me a screenshot 3 minutes later. I saved it to a folder on my personal drive labeled Professional Development. The weekend was chaos. For them, anyway. I spent Saturday morning at the farmer's market downtown, bought some heirloom tomatoes, a loaf of fresh sourdough, some local honey from a woman who'd been selling at that market for 30 years. My phone kept buzzing with messages I pretended not to see, texts from unknown numbers that were almost certainly people from the company using personal devices because their corporate accounts were being monitored. Kevin's updates came through like dispatches from a war zone. Saturday, 11 a.m., Dylan called emergency all hands for infrastructure team. Everyone's in the server room. Nobody knows what they're doing. Saturday, 4 p.m., they've been trying to access the key management system for 5 hours. Keeps rejecting their credentials. Dylan is literally screaming at people. Saturday, 9 p.m. They called in outside consultants, 3 different cybersecurity firms. None of them can figure out the system architecture. One guy actually laughed when he saw the code. Sunday, 2 a.m. They've locked themselves out of 2 production systems. Something about failed authentication attempts triggering security protocols. Federal monitoring system flagged the anomalies. Sunday, 8 a.m. Third production system is down. Client portal is offline. Dylan hasn't slept in 36 hours. He looks like death. Sunday, 6 p.m. FBI cybersecurity liaison called. Wanted to know why our federal systems were showing unusual access patterns. Dylan had to explain that he fired the only person who knew how the systems worked. I wasn't there, but someone said the FBI guy actually laughed. Dylan tried calling me around 9 p.m. Sunday. Then again at 11. Then at 2 a.m. Monday morning, which I found particularly satisfying. I didn't answer. I was watching a nature documentary about emperor penguins. Did you know they can hold their breath for over 20 minutes underwater? Remarkable creatures. Very patient. I felt a certain kinship. Monday morning brought the email I'd been waiting for. Not from Dylan, from Richard Mercer, the CTO, Dylan's uncle, the man who'd installed his nephew in a position he wasn't qualified for, and then looked the other way while he systematically dismantled 8 years of careful security architecture. Marcus, the email was short, desperate. We've encountered some unexpected challenges with our infrastructure transition. Your expertise would be invaluable in resolving these issues. We're prepared to discuss consulting arrangements at your earliest convenience. Please call me directly at your convenience. I waited 3 hours before responding. Timed it perfectly to arrive during their 11 a.m. crisis meeting with the federal compliance team. Richard, thank you for reaching out. I'm currently evaluating several opportunities and am not available for immediate consultation. My standard consulting rate is $850 per hour, with a 40-hour minimum retainer and a 90-day commitment clause. I would be happy to discuss terms after the current contract review period concludes and any outstanding compliance issues have been resolved. Best regards, Marcus Chen. The federal contract termination notice arrived Tuesday afternoon at 4:17 p.m. Section 7.2. Material changes to security infrastructure without written approval from the government technical liaison. Automatic review had escalated to automatic termination with full penalty clause enforcement. $18 million. Gone. 12 months of penalty payments. Gone. 8 years of perfect compliance history. Gone. But that wasn't the worst of it. The contract termination triggered a cascade of consequences that Dylan definitely hadn't anticipated, because Dylan had never actually read the contracts he was supposed to be managing. Our federal certification was immediately suspended, pending a full security investigation. That suspension automatically flagged Meridian Technologies in 3 separate government contractor databases. 2 commercial clients with federal subcontracting requirements received automated notifications that their primary vendor was no longer compliant with federal security standards. Those notifications triggered review clauses in their own contracts. Both clients initiated exit procedures within 48 hours. Combined value, $12 million in annual recurring revenue. The board convened an emergency session Friday morning. I know because the meeting invite accidentally went to an old distribution list that still included my personal email address. Probably Kevin's work. He'd always had a talent for administrative sabotage. The subject line was immediate leadership review and organizational assessment. The attached agenda included 4 items. Item 1, federal contract loss analysis and financial impact assessment. Item 2, infrastructure audit findings and security incident review. Item 3, executive accountability assessment and organizational changes. Item 4, path forward and stakeholder communication strategy. Richard Mercer, the CTO, recused himself from the meeting. That's corporate speak for threw his nephew under the bus to save his own position. The aftermath unfolded over the following weeks like a slow-motion avalanche. Dylan was stripped of all project oversight by the following Monday, quietly suspended, pending internal review. Though everyone in the company knew what that meant, his Slack profile disappeared. His email auto-response changed to currently unavailable. His parking space, the one right next to the entrance that executives got, was reassigned to a senior engineer who'd been with the company for 15 years. The only trace of Dylan Mercer that remained in the building was a calendar meeting titled Strategic Synergies Quarterly Planning that nobody had the energy to delete. The final damage assessment took 6 weeks to compile. The numbers leaked eventually, the way all corporate disasters eventually leak. $18 million federal contract terminated. $12 million in commercial client exits due to compliance concerns. $4.8 million in emergency consulting fees, trying to unfunk systems that nobody understood. $2.3 million in legal costs for contract disputes and regulatory responses. Unknown millions more in reputation damage, lost opportunities, and the general organizational trauma of watching your company implode in public. The company's valuation dropped 27% in the next quarterly investor update. A planned acquisition by a larger tech firm fell through entirely when the buyers discovered the depth of the infrastructure chaos. They cited concerns about technical debt and organizational culture. What they meant was they didn't want to buy a company that had just publicly fired its way into a federal security incident. And Dylan Mercer, his LinkedIn profile went dark 3 weeks after the termination. Someone told me later he'd moved to Austin to work on a new startup. Something about AI-powered wellness apps. I'm sure that will go well. The call came on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after the federal termination notice. Not from Meridian Technologies, from a federal contractor I'd never heard of called Sentinel Security Systems. They'd seen the news coverage. They'd heard through industry channels about what happened. They'd done their own research and discovered that the architect behind Meridian's 8-year perfect compliance record was suddenly available. The offer was straightforward. Director of Security Architecture, 30% salary increase, full benefits starting immediately, and a team, an actual team, of 12 security engineers who would report to me and help implement whatever systems I wanted to build. The commute was shorter. The office was nicer. The server room smelled like recycled air. Impossibility. On my first day, my new manager, a woman named Sarah, who'd spent 20 years in federal security before moving to the private sector, walked me through the facility. She stopped at a rack of servers in the corner of the main data center. "This is your domain now, Marcus." She gestured at the blinking lights, the humming machines, the infrastructure waiting to be built. Design it however you think is right. Document it however makes sense. Just keep us secure and keep us compliant. And talk to me before you make changes. Because I actually want to understand what we're building here. I nodded, looked at the equipment, thought about Dylan and his PowerPoints, and his cloud-native future, and his confidence that never had anything real behind it. You know what kills most companies. I said it quietly, almost to myself. It's not hackers. It's not competitors. It's not market changes. It's someone who thinks they can replace what they don't understand. Sarah laughed, but not unkindly. Is that a warning? No. I turned to face her. It's a promise. I'll make sure you always understand exactly what's holding this place together, what the systems do, why they're built the way they're built. And if you ever want to change something, we'll talk first. We'll plan together. And nobody gets blindsided. She shook my hand. That's all I ask. The flowers arrived 3 months later. Simple arrangement. White lilies and something green I couldn't identify. No card, just a small envelope tucked into the stems with a folded note inside. The handwriting was shaky, uncertain, like someone who wasn't used to apologizing and hadn't quite figured out how to do it. You were right about Section 7.2. That's all it said. We should have listened. I put the note in my desk drawer, next to a printed copy of the original Meridian federal contract with Section 7.2 highlighted in yellow. Then I went back to work, building systems, writing documentation, training the team that would eventually know everything I knew, because that's how you build something that lasts. Funny thing about security, the best systems don't make noise. They just work quietly in the background, protecting everything, until someone is foolish enough to ignore them. Dylan Mercer found that out the hard way. I found it out too, years ago, when I first started building walls that nobody could see. The difference is, I never forgot which side of the wall I was standing on, and I never assumed that silence meant weakness. Sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one holding all the keys. And sometimes the best revenge is simply watching someone lock themselves out. Appreciate you sticking around for the whole story. If you made it this far, you're exactly the kind of person who understands that karma doesn't need help, but definitely appreciates witnesses. Hit that subscribe button, unless you want to end up like Dylan, scrambling through documentation you don't understand, while everything you thought you controlled burns down around you. The next story is already in the works, and trust me, it's even better.